What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of my channel. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of being an international collector of sports cards and trading cards. Alright, so while we're talking about some of the pros and cons of being an international collector, today in this video, I'm going to be opening up this 2023 Panini K-League card. These just recently released, actually. K-League is a Major League Soccer league based in South Korea. I believe this is the first time that Panini actually produced something for K-League, so it's really cool. They are being sold at mostly 7-Elevens, which is like konbini stores here, but I was able to grab a box of it. Just purchased it online, and you can tell it's like kind of double taped here, and then some, I don't know, tampering, manipulation, whatever you want to call it, on the side there. So not really expecting big cards. Like you can even see some of the cards kind of, being on the outside, but it is what it is. I'm going to open it while I talk about some of my experience so far as an international collector and some of the pros and cons of it. So let's get started right away. Okay, so I would start with some of the pros first. I'm naturally a person that prefers good news over bad news, so let's start with some of the pros. Number one, big pro that I've really experienced being based out in Asia, I'm based in South Korea, if you didn't know, is that naturally you deal with more so kind of collector, type of mentality folks than sort of flippers. I mean, in the US as well, obviously there's a ton of collectors and a ton of people who, want to hold their assets long term, but you also do have a lot of flippers. And I don't want to put a negative connotation to that. People do it, as an active income for themselves and so on. So, they see an opportunity to take a margin, buy at a lower price and sell at a higher price. Like that definitely is more plethora, I think, in the US, which can lead to just feeling a little bit I don't know, out of the loop in a sense when you have a card that you really cherish and somebody, offers to purchase it at a price, that you can't refuse. You decide to sell it, but immediately that the card is out of their hands. It doesn't feel like super great, especially, I tend to hoard my cards as much as I can. Some of the cards that I PC, like, I really hate to see them go, even for a good price. And so naturally in the US, you deal with more kind of liquidity and speed when you deal with people, but here internationally, people definitely tend to hold their cards longer. And I think it's both of the mentality of a collector mentality, but also because it's just harder to rotate cards as quickly as they do in the US. There's just not as much opportunity. There's no shows that you can kind of go and like sell the cards immediately to, or someone you can meet up, just like a couple minutes down by drive. Like there isn't that much of that. So I actually like the idea of like people messaging each other and calling each other on WhatsApp or whatever, and kind of making a deal so that that the card will not leave the buyer's hand sort of immediately, right? So that's, I think, one big pro. Second pro of being an international collector is definitely the diversity of card collecting and the cards that are collected. I think in the US, the primary sort of like the big football, baseball, basketball really, dominates the floor, and especially during, seasons when it's relevant for each of those sport. For example, right now, I think football is a really, really big key category. That kind of momentum where like the entire sort of, dominating force, in any given time of the period being solely focused on football, or like, basketball just before the playoffs, or baseball during preseason, like that's not as much there. And so people just really collect what they like, I think, which like even in sports cards here in Asia, soccer is huge, Formula One is huge, hockey is huge, rugby is huge. I mean, people just collect what they want. So there's just more diversity in the categories. It's more kind of evenly distributed, in my opinion. And so, and then when we get to kind of the TCG categories, right? There's Pokemon, there's obviously One Piece, there's, MTG, and then there's like bunch of people that collect like anime, cards. So like, for example, I know people who collect like Demon Slayer cards, which like I don't know that many in the States. I'm sure there are, but it's just not like as dominating force. And so I really like the diversity of cards that are being collected by each person. It's not necessarily just about, what is the, value increase potential of these cards, but they just really collect what they like. So I really like that aspect. And then the third big pro of, here's a guy that I used to like. But anyways, the third biggest pro of being an international collector is easier access to shows and shops internationally. I mean, that makes sense. If you are based in like Texas, for example, in the US, it's gonna be really hard for you to travel to Europe or Asia, right? You have to like do a layover in like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco before kind of, traveling out to each kind of region and continent. So it's harder to go to international shows. But like, for example, I'm based in Seoul. It takes me about an hour and a half to 2 to get to Japan, depending on which city. It takes me an hour and a half to get to Beijing, 2 hours to get to Taipei, 3 hours to go to Hong Kong, 6 hours to go to Singapore. It is farther for me to go to London, but hopefully I don't have to go to London because we have a lot of folks out there already. But yeah, just the opportunity to be able to travel to all these different cities with amazing shops. I mean, like, I will do more vlogs, in the coming weeks as I travel to different cities, and show you what kind of shops exist in, Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, Tokyo, Osaka. I mean, there's so many of these amazing shops that aren't necessarily publicized on social media. And so access to those, and then like big shows like the Macau show or Japan show, or even like the Pokemon championship that just happened back in summer. I think that's just a huge pro of being international. Is cost is really relatively cheaper to travel to different countries, and then also travel time is very, very short relative to coming all the way from LA or Dallas or New York. Oh, speaking of, wow, I got the card that I was looking for. If you guys don't know this guy, he scored 2 headers versus Ghana. Was it Ghana, I believe, in the last World Cup. He right now plays for a team in Denmark. He has moved on from K-League, but yay, got his card. Okay, so now we're done with the sort of like the bigger pros of being an international collector. Let's move on to some of the cons of being an international collector. So number one con, downside of being an international collector is that there is not much of a culture around trading. What I mean by that is, oftentimes in the US, when you want to pursue a card, you ask, is this card available as a trade? So you are essentially not giving him a full value, perhaps in US dollars or Bitcoin, whatever it is, but you offer the seller, hey, here are some cards that I have that, I'm making available to trade. And so that practice is very common in the US. Here's another card that I really like. Ki Sung-young. He was, he's too old now, but he was a very, very prominent player back in the day. So I will sleeve these on the side. As I was saying, there's not much of a big culture around trade. People just strictly sell or buy. Like, even I've had an instance where they bought something from me and then I wanted something of their card, but they just wanted the cash for that, and then they wanted to pay cash for my card versus like kind of this like, because I guess when you do trade value, like it's maybe a little bit different than what you would take as a cash value. Like, for example, if an item sold for $1,000 on eBay and you're using that as a comparable price for that for the item, you could argue that the trade value of that is, I don't know, $900, because the net home take fee for the seller of that card on that platform wasn't $1,000 probably. So there's like room for negotiation, but I don't know, I just get a sense that like a lot of collectors out in Asia, they don't like to kind of like, walk the gray and like kind of push each other, beyond their comfort zone. So they would rather just do a strict cash transaction and then do a strict cash transaction. I haven't gotten any numbered cards so far, so we'll see if any of these are numbered, but so far the quality of the cards are amazing. They're like foilish, leaving some of my thumbprints on there, but it's great. So number 2 con, I think, of being an international collector is kind of related to number 1. Selling, especially in the Asia Pacific region, like selling a card is kind of looked down upon. It's almost like when you have a card out in the market, you know, they kind of question, is this person running out of money? It's kind of funny because I do think that, you know, at least in the sports card space, not the trading card space, absolutely, but in the sports card space out in, you know, Asia, like it's definitely high-end plays. A lot of, you know, people with discretionary income are in the market. So when you say, you know, sell a card or list a card for sale, but kind of frown of what's going on, and you kind of have to defend yourself, like, I'm just maybe rotating this card to get a bigger card. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. So that culture still exists where, you know, I think it's generally cultural. It's not just around trading cards and sports cards, but, you know, like, why is this person selling their house? Like, you know, maybe they aren't as rich as we thought they were, you know, that kind of like, no one really actually says it out loud, but that definitely is something that people are still very worried about. And so you have, you know, folks who don't want, you know, some of the deals to be known, transactions to be public, or they would much rather sell, you know, through consignment because they don't want to be known as somebody who sells cards. So moving on to the last downside, con of being an international collector, and this is kind of like a no-brainer, but it is a big con, is purchasing cards from the US is difficult. You obviously have platforms now like, you know, Golden, PWCC, eBay that offer, you know, these opportunities to purchase the card and, you know, just have it in their vault. But I think a big beauty of, you know, kind of card collecting is being able to have these cards in your hand at one point in time, right? Maybe not all the time, because I don't know if you guys look at your card every single day. I certainly don't. They sit in, you know, in my closet. But, you know, I think one of the beauty is definitely like looking at it and, you know, seeing, you know, the card in real life. But purchasing cards in the US not only has that issue of I'm not able to get the card right away immediately as an international collector, but there's also, you know, import tax, shipping, insurance, and, you know, a lot more kind of considerations and costs related to it. And so purchasing cards out of US, which I think the US still has, you know, a lot of good cards. Pokemon, and MTG and sports still live in US. Of course, there are great cards out here too, but I think there's still just the volume of like liquidity and speed is definitely more in the US. And so buying cards out of the US is just really difficult. So unless you have like family members out there or someone you can trust to kind of buy those cards for you, like it is a difficult task, I think, to be able to buy things out of the US as somebody based not in the US. Here we go. We got a legend here. Hong Myung-bo, he was a legendary player for South Korea's team, and I believe he once coached the national team as well. This is great. I love these. The packs are kind of like ginormous. I don't know if you can tell, like versus the size of the card. The size of the card is what you would imagine, but you see how like the paper is kind of, yeah, I don't know what happened there. These were printed in Italy by Panini SPA. These are not too expensive. I think I paid about 35 bucks, 40 bucks for the whole box, so not too expensive, but I don't think they're being sold anywhere else outside of Korea. So yeah, I think these are wonderful. Wonderful that K-League is also getting some attention as a standalone. All right, so those were the pros and cons of being an international collector. There's obviously a ton more, but I wanted to touch upon some of those. If you are an international collector and you want to add to the list that I just shared, please leave them in the comments. And like I mentioned, I hope I can do more vlogs to different shops, different shows based here in Asia. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye. That was awesome.